Charles Reiser, along with wife Sharon Reiser, are the co-founders of the Temple Academies, which are Paul Mitchell schools in Annapolis and Frederick, Maryland. Charles is also actively engaged in DC with the last 15 years, talking to members of Congress, and is part of a regulation legislative committee within the industry. Today, we're going to talk about what exactly is going on with all the information that we're seeing all over social media, the posts that people are making, all about cosmetology schools getting shut down. What is this? What do we need to know? What do we need to do? What are the different perspectives? We got all that and more. Welcome back to the Hairdresser Strong Show. My name is Robert Hughes, and I am your host. And today I'm with Charles Reiser. How are you doing today, Charles?
I'm doing awesome, Robert. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming. Um, I, I, uh, I have been just for the audience. Charles and Sharon, we have been actively engaging them with their schools and talking with their students about their careers moving forward, and take a very big interest in the pathway of success for hairdressers, starting all the way at the beginning as student. And so this, when we hear that 80 to 90% of schools are shutting down, it throws off alarms. It's like, well, what's going on? And then there's all these details, and so I'm excited to get to the bottom of this today with you, Charles. Can you go ahead and just kind of give us like what exactly is going on out there?
So, as a brief history, what's happening now is not what's been happening for the last 15 years. So, very briefly, the Department of Education says that anyone that participates at the federal level with Pell Grants and Stafford loans and all the other funding that comes through what we refer to as federal financial aid must prepare their graduates to be gainfully employed. Well, for years, that never was defined. And starting under the Obama administration, the Department of Education decided they would start trying to define what gainful employment was. And for the longest time, it really only applied to for-profit schools. So not just trade schools, but any institution that was publicly traded or had basically didn't wasn't a nonprofit status institution. We called that gainful employment regulations. And it's been off again, on again for years. And our industry has successfully fought it, mainly on the grounds that because it was arbitrary, it only targeted one specific section of the industry. The last time the Trump administration was in, they actually dismissed it all. Then the Biden administration came in and they brought it back, and then that was defeated. And then they brought it back again, and then they left office, and now the Trump administration's in. So we enter into the Trump administration with gainful employment still being a regulatory thing and still being fought in courts. Well, what ended up happening, of course, is well publicized now that the Trump administration has been on a tear about higher education. Does there value with it? Is there a point to it? Is it really preparing students for real world experiences? Is it too expensive? And they've been working to try to that's their main focus with it. So last year, Congress passed something called the One Big Beautiful Bill, or OBBB, or OB cubed, or whatever you wish to call it. And as part of that, they did two things. One, they eliminated gainful employment. They physically Congress took that out of the legislation. And then the second thing was they replaced it with something that was called the College Affordability Act. And at its core, what the crux we're talking about today is this idea that a program must have generate a certain level or a certain standard of wage for the graduates. And then they created that. It basically, is it going to be better than if you didn't go to the school at all? Are you going to make more money than if you didn't go to the school at all? And so that's really the crux of what we're talking about here is this wage test, or this what they call the College Affordability Act. There's a lot of other portions of that act that are creating problems right now for other industries, but that's the thing that we're talking about today.
Got it. Got it. So just to get some clarity, are you saying that the recent legislation made it so any sort form of higher education that receives public funding and public like student loans basically, then they have to meet a standard of wage. So it's not just for profit, it's not for
Everybody.
profit. So any university, like that means that potentially we could see like 4-year colleges getting shut down as well.
Not so much. Four-year colleges, of course, offer hundreds of programs. Cosmetology schools tend to offer one or two. We offer cosmetology and barbering and aesthetics and nails and things like that. And most smaller schools have one. Like they'll just be a nail school, or it'll just be a school of aesthetics or something like that. Um, Universities can just shed. Like if a community college has a cosmetology program or a nail program that gets dinged by this, they shut that down, right? And they go. Under the last gainful
Oh.
employment, we were actually contacted by a lot of local community colleges because they didn't want to have the certificate program anymore. And they're like, we don't want to deal with this. Will you guys just offload our students for us? And of course, when we defeated it, they're like, okay, never mind, we're going to keep it. But universities are usually not immune, they don't have the same stressors that we do when we're single program colleges. Now, I will tell you, nursing programs, truck driving schools, most of the trades, the schools that deal with pastors, so that their program is only for religious outcomes, to train to become ministers and pastors, they're looking at some serious things. Nursing programs are looking at a serious loss in this. This is not something that's just affecting the cosmetology industry. It's something that, as more and more of these unique, specialized universities are realizing, they're going to get caught up in this as well. Now, earlier when we were talking, I know there's a lot of pushback on this. Like, what inherently is the problem? Like, how is that a bad thing? Like, if your cosmetology program, Charles, doesn't generate revenue for or income for your graduates, why would you stay? Like, why would you be allowed to continue to keep your program open if there's no value to it? And so, well, the first big thing is that I just want to kind of outline, when regulations come in place, what happens is Congress or the legislative body will create a legislative piece of something, right? They'll say, okay, let's use Maryland as an example. Maryland will come back to the regulatory people and say, okay, we now want mobile salons. Create the regulations. We're going to legislate mobile salons, but now you have to create the regulations that allow mobile salons to exist. Same thing happens at the federal level. So what happens is Congress says, okay, we've got this new we want colleges to be affordable. Department of Education, create the regulations. So the Department of Education then comes up and says, we're going to do this thing called negotiated rulemaking. We're going to invite everybody from all the different industries, all the shareholders into this big, huge session, and we're going to hash out these rules. And it sounds great. Again, on the surface, oh my goodness, what a wonderful way to create a regulation. We're going to ask all the shareholders what works for them, and then we're going to come to an understanding, and then we're going to create this thing that works for everybody. What people don't understand is that if we can't come to an understanding, then the department can do whatever they want. The law says that if there's no consensus, then the department says, okay, doesn't matter what you all want, we're going to do whatever we want. And what happened this time is the people that represented the cosmetology industry were not um we were not primaries, we were secondary, so we didn't get a vote. And so the department's like, well, we had a unanimous consent on this, and we said, no, the people that were most impacted by this weren't allowed to even vote on this. So there's problem number one, right? So people were like, well, weren't you guys at negotiate? Yeah, but the department didn't allow us to have a voice in this at all. Um,
So who spoke for the industry then?
what's called the career trade industry. So people that represented all trades got in there, and not every trade is
Mm.
going to be impacted by this, right? So we basically, with all due respect to everybody that we're negotiating, because it's a very difficult job, we got thrown under the bus. Everybody knew, the department flat out knew in negotiations. They told us that they knew this was going to shut down cosmetology schools, but but so be it, right? And so
Yes.
here's where this gets into the weeds, and this is why I want all your listeners to understand. The idea was, let's test and look at high school graduates. Okay, we're going to look at high school graduates, look at their income, and let's test and look at the graduates from your program, and let's see if somebody goes through your program and they're not making more than a high school graduate's making, then your program has no value. Like, the person could have saved money, not gone to your program, stayed a high school graduate, and ultimately made more money without having to invest the money into the career, right? No logical person is going to say, well, that's a horrible idea. That makes on the surface, perfectly good sense. So here's where this becomes a problem. How do you determine what a high school graduate is? Is there a data out there that when you file your tax returns, you say, I'm just a high school graduate? No, there is
Good
not.
point.
There's no way to do that. So what the department has decided to do is use this thing called the American Community Survey, ACS, which comes out with the census. And what this survey does is it looks to see who in your household is a high school graduate and who is a degree earner. Now, here's why that's important. It's not looking to see whether you went to a trade school or you went to a nursing program or you got any kind of certificate. It's looking at degree earners versus non-degree earners. And so our first issue with this is all of my students that I'm being told are on the degree side for this metric are actually in the high school metric because of the flaw in the data. The department says they know there's a flaw in
Interesting.
the data. They know there's a problem with it. They don't know how to fix it. So here's why that's an issue. In our industry, the people that fall into the high school metric data, they are tested at 14 years out of high school. So we're looking 14 years back. We're looking at their income after working for 14 years. My graduates, we're looking at 3 years out of high school. So this are out of my program. So right off the bat, why we're so upset at this is you're looking at somebody in this metric on this side, 14 years out of school in their mid 30s. You're looking at one of the graduates coming out of college at 21 years old, just entering whatever career path they're in. That is by any definition is a horrible thing. Like you can't even possibly think that somebody 3 years out of school is going to be making what somebody 14 years out of high school is going to be making in any trade that they have. The second part of the flaw is we know in our industry, right, that 3 years out of school, you're probably going to be working part time, not by not because you can't, but because it's a choice. Mostly women in our industry, starting families, getting their start in the industry right now, they're not full-time 40-hour a week employees on average. We actually know this for a fact. We've commissioned studies that tell us what this is. Whereas on the high school side, they're 40-hour a week plus and different wage opportunities. Robert, here's the thing that really boggles the mind. We have commissioned as an industry, the entity Cunity, which a lot of people in our industry know Cunity because they do salon income-based programs on how to save money for hairstylists. They work with schools as well on proper financial process. They're an amazing organization. But they have done over the last 6 years, two major studies. First, they went and they looked at W-2 employees and they looked at people that worked for chain salons. And they did a full vetted spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and got actual data. They interviewed thousands and thousands of hairdressers and they got real data. Then they hired accounting teams and they went back and they looked at the data to verify it. And what the Cunity data shows is that the average hairdresser 3 years out of school works 21 hours a week and makes $35,000 a year at 21 hours a week. And so if you extrapolate that out to 40 hours a week, that's a $65,000 to $70,000 a year job. It's $35 an hour. That is what a hairdresser makes on average in the United States 3 years out of school. When we pulled our data for this metric, the high school graduate data showed $35,500. My graduate data was 35,000. So I will lose access to federal funding over $500 delta. But when you look at hourly wages, my graduates are actually making twice what a high school graduate data does 3 years out of school versus 14 years out of school. So what we're
That
upset
seems
about,
like a super easy fix, though,
it
to
is a
go from
super easy
hourly
fix.
to,
It is a
but
super easy
are
fix.
they not willing to do it?
No, not at all. When the department published the rule, they spent 15 to 20 pages pushing back on this argument, saying that there's no easy way for them to do that. We even talked about the fact that the data is flawed because it doesn't include tips and wages and all kinds of other things. And they said, well, we can't control whether somebody lies on their taxes. This is the best, most even way to do this. Here's why we have a problem with it. Even if that's true, the department has acknowledged that the question, the way that the question was answered on this survey, the high school graduates aren't really high school graduates. They're high school graduates and certificate earners, which means that the survey is comparing my students at 14 years to my students at 3 years. Of course, the irony is that it, I could go on for another hour. We don't have time for this to tell you why the data is flawed. But the bottom line is the data metric is completely flawed, and the department has said they are aware of it and they don't care. They're going to move forward with this anyways.
So, okay. So, just to kind of like summarize, correct me if I got any of this wrong. Just to put it in some other words for the audience, when the government's data says you need to earn X amount of money, more than a high school student,
Right.
and when we look at the data in the industry, it's showing that people work part time and make the same as a full-time high school student, but which basically means that they make more than the high school student, but they only work part-time, so the government can't tell that it's part-time versus full-time wait hours, and there is no recourse and no opportunity as of yet to adjust the way the government looks at the data to appreciate this part-time versus full-time breakdown.
100%. And actually, you hit on one of the key portions of this. In the past, schools always had the ability to basically protest the data. When it came out, say, hey, look, we want an opportunity to do our own surveys and show you that the data is flawed. And the department stripped that out of the regulation. They are not giving us any opportunity to, if this becomes regulation, if this gets published, to protest this. Um, and honestly, Robert, the biggest flaw to this is that 14-year versus 3-year. The idea that you're looking at a high school graduate metric, it's not apples to apples. And when we just it's just it's devastating to us.
So okay, so let's discuss like the sensational stuff that we're seeing online. 80 to 90% of schools closing. Tell us a little bit about. So I feel like we got kind of like an understanding of some of the nuanced issues of where we're at and why that this is it seems like this is a challenging fight because of the way everything's structured. And
Right.
so I want to get to the part of like, where do we go from here in just a moment. But before, I just want to lean into this other piece. So, like, what is this 80 to 90% of schools closing? You told me before we got on air, but could you just share with the audience, like, what are we talking about? What is, like, to understand kind of magnitude of this thing?
So the 80 to 90% number is actually closer to 90 to 92%. And that data comes from the Department of Education. They did a survey and they figured out because they did preliminary data. They went and looked and said, okay, let's not look at this and let's look at last year's data. And we already compared. We know how to get this data. And we looked at my school graduates and I looked at there and they said, okay, we looked and then we looked at cosmetology schools nationwide and we saw that over 90% of them would fail this metric. So the department is the one that brought that to us. The secondary part of that, though, when we pushed back on that was, well, we've been told that only a small percentage of schools across the country participate in the federal programs. So it doesn't matter if they shut down because all the other schools will be able to take over the training of these students. What we've pushed back on, we've gone to the state bodies, we've gone to Beauty School Directory, which handles marketing for cosmetology schools and said, you know, what does that look like? And they said, well, the problem is that may be a true statement in some states, like in Texas, only 15% of the schools are accredited and would be affected by this regulation. In Florida, it's 92%. In Maryland, it's 89%, right? So yes, on a national average, states like Alaska have 3 accredited schools, right? But it ignores the fact that overall, over 85% of all cosmetology graduates in the United States come out of an accredited institution. So what
How
that
many,
means
what
is
percentage come out of accredited?
over 85% of them come out of an accredited institution, meaning the schools that are accredited train the vast majority of students in the industry. So yes, it is a true statement that if all the accredited schools shut down, that a vast majority of schools will stay open, but those schools are so small, they can't handle the amount of students that would be lost if the larger schools shut down. As importantly, it's expensive to open up a school. In the state of Maryland, it can take years to get approvals to even open up, and unaccredited schools are held to the same fiscal standards as accredited schools. So, how do we even spin up a program fast enough to handle the loss that we're going to have in not being able to train and graduate people in our industry?
So let me understand one piece of what you said. So are you saying that the majority of cosmetology schools in the US are not accredited?
Yes, they're smaller. It's very
So
expensive to become.
there's a bunch of these small schools around the country that
Yes,
are collecting, making their people pay cash for the tuition.
yes,
Is that what that means? Yeah. Okay.
yes.
That's one, I didn't know that. And I maybe because in this area I that I'm in, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, it seems like maybe the majority of the schools are maybe
They are.
accredited. Is
They
that's
are.
okay.
Yes.
All right. And then even those schools, if they're taking cash, they're probably designed in a way to they can handle so much capacity. They probably can't take on all those students, even if there was an opportunity. And
Right.
the next thing is if you have cosmetology programs only taking cash and not getting any sort of financial aid, then the facilities are probably there's probably a small percentage of the facilities of these smaller schools that could compare to a school like yours or some of the other schools that I go in and visit. So like there's a lot of nuance there that spells disaster, when you're thinking about like that type of stuff.
Well, the nuance isn't so much the quality of the facility, it's the accessibility to it. When we were able to the Title IV program, the federal program has opened up the ability for people, single moms who only have one income source, that how do they make monthly payments to a $15,000 school? How do they come up with the money for their student kit when the student kit is $3,000 or $2,000 or even $1,000, right? The accessibility to schools, to the education market, to people who are not independently successful or financially well off is what is going to be impacted here. People that had access to the trades because they could use Pell Grants to offset their tuition, because they could use low interest loans and that's another thing. People will tell you that, well, our industry has a high default rate. That's simply not true. The cosmetology industry as a whole has a lower default rate than community colleges do. But the reality is it's not so much the facilities, right? It's the fact that a huge swath of our industry are not going to have access to funding anymore, which means they're not going to have access to the education because they're going to have to pay out of pocket. And even if it's a monthly expense, how many people can fork out $200 to $300 a month while going to school full time, while raising a child, or while trying to work to pay their bills? That's just the reality is it's almost impossible. We know this, especially now with gas prices and cost of living going up and all the other things. A lot of our students have to choose between coming to school and putting gas in their car, right?
So,
It's a tricky thing.
what do you say to people who will say, because you brought this up, like, so for the audience to know, the Charles spoke at Presley Poe and Friends, which was hosted at one of your schools, and you mentioned the deregulation piece. So, like, I imagine that some people might respond to some of this stuff saying, well, let's get rid of licensing, or let's like reduce licensing so much that it's not going to be as expensive or it's not going to take as much time or whatever. Could you tell us a little bit about that piece? And how does this involve this, or is this a separate thing that is just layered on top of it? Or is this
The
kind of like does these things go together?
the deregulation of our industry is a whole separate podcast if you really wanna get into that. It's being led by the Koch brothers, who believe that licensure is a barrier to employment. It falls loosely under what's called right to work. Maryland is unique in that we move in the opposite direction on that. Even braiders in Maryland, when I was on the board of cosmetology, would come in every month and petition us to please, please, please add braiding into licensure because of the harm that was coming from unprofessional braiders out there. That's a whole other thing to jump into on this stuff.
Gotcha. Okay.
But the reality is this does loosely fall under this stuff. Like, these things have been actively being pursued on the federal level for almost 2 decades now. The trying to shut down our industry or our trades from being accessed, by on the federal level. And what I said at Presley Poe and Friends is that every day people sit at tables at our governments, local governments, state governments, and federal governments, and make decisions that impact our industry, from licensure to the sanitation requirements to everything like that. We need a seat at that table. We our world gets impacted every day by new rules and regulations that let's use Maryland as an example. CE, continuing education. When that hit, I was shocked the number of hairdressers that had no idea that that was coming down the pike, and yet that regulation had been in play for 7 years. And it just took that long for us to get the policy in place to be able to put it, but it had been passed. It had been on the state board website. It had been active. It was coming, but nobody knew about it because as an industry, we tend to not want to be aware of these things. And so what my ask is, guys, get loud. Go to your state board meetings. Go sit in these things when at the state of Maryland publishes on the cosmetology board website every legislative piece that's being enacted or being voted on or being debated that impacts the cosmetology industry. You can go read it and then write to the legislative body, the person who's sponsoring it, if you don't like it, right? Educate yourself. Be aware of what's happening because this stuff will hit you when you're not expecting it, and then you're like, I didn't know it was coming. I didn't even have a say in the matter because the debates already happened. And let me tell you something. One person can change everything. Maryland has a blow dry license, blow dry only license, because the woman that owned Dry Bar went state to state and petitioned legislative bodies to enact it so she didn't have to wait for a cosmetology license. She could get students faster out of school. The mobile salon in the state of Maryland got enacted by one guy who wanted to have a mobile salon. And so he worked for years and got the legislature passed. One human being did it. And so we have the power. We have the ability to do this. We just need to be loud. When I go down and talk to Congress, outside of the restaurant industry, we are the largest lobbying group on Capitol Hill. They know for a fact every one of them get their hair done in a salon. Every one of them. I mean, I know we don't have a lot of time. Let me tell you an ironically funny story. The last time we were down there debating this stuff, and they were telling me how we didn't have any value and all this other stuff. 2 days later, the person who runs the congressional hair salon was calling my school, trying to get my graduates to come down there and work on Capitol Hill. And I'm like, the irony of sitting in front of a legislative body and being told I have no value as a school, and then 2 days later, your people calling me, asking me for employees to work in your hair salon was just, it just made me laugh out loud, right? But it illustrates the point. Even Congress needs hairdressers and barbers, right? We are a necessary and needed part. What we do is a license to touch. We have the ability to fundamentally make people feel good. Do you need a license for that? Not to feel good? No, obviously we can do that on ourselves. But do we need a license? Absolutely. In California, where they reduced the license to 1,000 hours, the salons they're in a rebellion right now because they're getting people who are not ready to work, and the salons now have to spend time training. 1,500 clock hours in Maryland is barely enough time for me to get basic skill sets up and running. And even then, there's a lot of salons that have training programs that have to then train to get people up and running. So I always tell people, here's how you can debate that. Where do you want the training to happen? My school or your hair salon? Because if my school goes away and this is an unlicensed thing, then you, as the salon owner, are going to be responsible for training that person and getting them up to speed to make sure they don't hurt the public.
Yeah, and
Where do
there's
you
a
want
big
that to
difference in training somebody that's never held a comb in their hands versus someone who's gone through a whole school program. I know
happen?
from firsthand experience. Okay, so real quick, so I do want to ask. There is one more question that came up yesterday. I was talking to a bunch of people, and the accountability piece came up on because the another part of what we're hearing is that there's a low percentage of people sticking around in the industry afterwards, and so they're leaving. So like, could you kind of talk on where this all comes in? Because it kind of sounds like that it's not the conversation isn't really around the accountability piece. That might be a separate conversation. It sounds kind of like that right now, the way the language in this legislation is written is kind of setting up an impossible scenario in the first
Right.
place. So even if the data are so like even if everybody stayed in school and stay that or everyone that was in school stayed in the industry, they're still going to be clocked at the wrong in the wrong way. So it sounds like the accountability question kind of comes later, but I have to ask because that's what people one of the questions that people wanted me to ask for you to address.
So as far as the fact that people leave the industry, is that what the
Well,
question is?
one is what information that we were discussing was that a high percentage of students, anywhere from 50 to 80% of students, aren't still in the industry after 2 to 5 years, and different people had different sources of that data. And then they're like, well, wait a minute, all these people are getting student loans and they're going into debt, and then they have to like work at another job to pay off their beauty school loans. So they were like that was the piece that they were leaning into, but it sounds like this whole conversation says that that's actually a separate conversation.
It
But
it
I
is.
wanted to know if you could
So
address that.
there's a lot of things to unpack to what you just said there. First of all, student loan debt's that's a great thing to come up. The average student loan across at least my schools is about $9,200 versus about 45 to $50,000 at university.
Right.
That $9,200 loan taken out on a Stafford loan is about $105 a month. That's what your repayment is. And if your income drops below a certain level, percentage of the poverty level, that can go down. You can have your payment reduced to zero depending on what your income is. So, as far as affordability of loans go, there are that's blown up as a part of a conversation on the national level, but my graduates are not borrowing 60, 70, $80,000 to come to school. Their student loan portion of what they take can be very small. The second thing is I don't look at the fact that people can come and enter and leave our industry as an issue. I think that's a joy. Like, I have plenty of my graduates that get their license that are going to go to college later, right? They want to get a business degree, but the license, there's a trade. I was the opposite. I went to college, got my degrees in computer science and physics. My family happened to be hairdressers. My mom said, "How'd you like to be a hairdresser?" So I went the other way. I mean, I I have two huge degrees that I don't use at all. But nobody debates that. Nobody ever says to me, "Oh my God, Charles, you didn't stay in the computer science field, so you wasted your education." It's the trades. I will always be able to cut hair. I will always have what's called a portable skill set that can go from state to state. They can go on cruise ships. They can go overseas. Um, I can work again. No, 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 no. I can set up a salon in my house if I want to raise my family and have people come into my home. If I have a separate business there, right? I have the flexibility to be able to choose when I want to do hair and when I don't want to do hair. And if another opportunity comes up, I can step away from the industry. You know what? And then my kids are raised, I can step back into it 10, 15 years later and become part of that. So, first of all, that metric is variable. I've seen it. I've seen it 50%. I've seen it at 10%. I've seen it at 5%. I've seen it all over the board. I can tell you this under CE in Maryland. What we discovered very quickly was the vast majority of the people that held licenses in Maryland hadn't been behind the chair in over 10 years. They maintained their license so they could go get their discounts at their supply shops and so that they could still cut hair at their friend's house or do their family or do something like that. So it's debatable whether they're actually working in a W-2 salon or renting a chair, whether you can say that they're really not in the industry. They're still doing hair. They're just not doing it behind the chair at a salon, right? And so, that's when I talk to these people that are coming through our CE programs, that's what I'm hearing. I'm holding on to this for the ability to be able to continue to do this when I want to do it. And what a joy. What a amazing thing about our industry that we can work when we want to work, not when we have to
Totally.
work.
So interesting. You make a really interesting perspective that totally changes the whole conversation. So that I can see why this piece isn't really part of the current conversation around this rule for wage focus, because it wouldn't be measuring attrition from the industry anyway. It's measuring what people are making in the industry, correct?
It's measuring what they report on their tax data. And I do want to hit on that.
Okay.
We as an industry, and this is everyone always just kind of nods and laughs when we talk about this, but we as an industry for decades have been notorious for not being honest on our taxes, not declaring our tips, not doing our true wages, and that data is just supported over and over again. Um, Back in the about 2 decades ago, the restaurant industry got something called a tip tax credit, and they asked the professional beauty industry if we wanted to be part of that legislation, and we denied. We refused to be part of it because we didn't want to draw attention to ourselves. Like, we didn't want to put a spotlight on this practice. And then we spent 20 more years trying to get that tip tax credit for salon owners, and now we got it. Last year, it finally got into place, so salon owners don't have to pay the matching, or they get a credit for the matching Medicare and Social Security pieces that they have to pay on tips. Wonderful victory, right? But it took us 20 years to get it that the restaurant industry had had for those last 2 decades. And then, of course, this administration did the no taxes on tips legislation, which means we don't have an excuse anymore. As hairdressers, we don't have an excuse to lie about our stuff. And why would you want to? Our salon has always declared all the tips to the register so that my employees can have proper social security set asides, can have 401k plans that actually match, can buy houses and buy cars because their income is properly documented on their W-2s. It's so easy not to wanna do this, guys. It really honestly is, but it's hurting. It's because, and Robert, we talked about this. When I go and talk to Congress, and I try to talk to the state, and I try to talk about the value of our industry, the very first thing they do is point at our income levels based on taxes and the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor's data on a national level says the average hairdresser makes less than $15,000 a year. And as I said, Robert, I don't know a hairdresser that makes $15,000 a year that's actively working, right? And yet, because of this propensity to not be accurate, that's what the government says. So they don't take us seriously. They don't think we have value because we don't
Well,
put value on ourselves. How about that?
Well, this has been a great conversation. I know we're at our time, but I did want to give you a chance to say any sort of call to action or anything that you want
Right.
folks to say. I will start off by saying that the viewers and listeners of Hairdresser Strong know that claiming your tips gives you purchase borrowing power. So if you want to buy real estate, then you need to be claiming your tips. So this should not be falling on deaf ears. That part you just said, because I want to claim my tips. I want my income to be high as possible. So the bank gives me loans so I can purchase property and other assets. So so anyway, so yeah, so would you just kind of wrap it up? What type of things can folks do? I know you said some things throughout, but maybe you can kind of give it to them in one spot.
The big call to action on this is to get loud. Call your representatives, write to them. There is something right now called calls to comment on this proposal with the Department of Education. And I know the Professional Beauty Association. I know Cengage, who publishes books under My Lady, Pivot Point. They've been sending messages out to people for a while. You can go to their websites. They have the links on their websites, and in fact, the Professional Beauty Association and the American Association of Cosmetology Schools actually has wonderful links that say, "Are you a hair salon? These are some of your talking points. Are you a licensed hairdresser? Here are some of your talking points. Are you a student in school? Here are some of your," and they kind of map it out for you. So those are called calls to comment. And one of the nice things is that every single letter under a call to comment the department gets, they have to respond to. If there's a million letters, they have to craft a million responses. And they have a certain time frame which they have to do this in. And so that's, make noise, right? But then again, like I said, even after all of this, get active. Be part of the voice that controls our industry. It's guys, we touch people. We are in everybody's lives, including our elected officials, and let them know what's important to you, where the value lies, and why our industry has value. And that's how you make sure that your voice is heard. That's how we make sure we don't find ourselves in these situations in the future.
Awesome. And claim your tips.
Please claim your tips. Just please be accurate. It's very important, not just for
Well,
personal wealth.
well, especially now that we got that credit, so we don't have to pay taxes on a certain amount. So
Right.
all right. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. I feel very much up to speed. I feel like I had only pieces of that information, and you gave me pieces to kind of complete the picture. I appreciate that. I know the audience will appreciate the nuances, and so any links, I will send you an email to ask you for whatever links we should put in the description below for folks.
Again, I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Charles. I enjoyed this conversation. I hope to have other conversations in the future. We touched on a couple of things that we could have a whole podcast about. But in the meantime, we will. So what is the date on this? So May 20th is when the comment period ends, right?
Right.
And then
We'll
so
find out
when will we know
by July.
by
And
July?
if the regulation goes in place in July, the first round of data will come out. We'll find out who passed and failed based on income data as reported last tax season. So anything that all the filing that just went in April. Everybody that fails has 1 year to fix it, however that is. So we get 1 more year, but if we fail, we're put on what's called monitoring, and we have to make all kinds of announcements, and we have to tell everybody that we're in danger of losing Title IV. And then by next July, if nothing happens and the regulation doesn't get appealed or caught up in a lawsuit, then if you fail the second time, you lose everything. And that's when we're looking at about a year before this impacts schools. So
Okay. Well, maybe we should touch base maybe at the end of the summer or something with like, this is where we're at, this is what we're looking at, this is what next steps are, etc.
perfect. I'm happy to do
Awesome.
that.
All right. Well, have a good one and I'll be talking to you soon.
All right. Thank you very much, Robert.
Bye.